So, I'm 33 and I'm recovering from yet another burnout. I had my first one, age 26, that lasted around 3 years, and it was pretty bad. It affected all areas of my life, and I was anywhere from entirely non-functional to partially functional in that 3 years. And then I recovered and had, you could say, the most successful, whatever that means, 3 years of my life, from age 29 to 32. Yet here I am again. It's certainly a humbling experience and a scary one as well. It's felt and continues to feel at times hopeless. It's a bit of a mental and physical health nightmare, and it can feel like your body and mind are kind of caving in on themselves. So if you're either in a burnout or suffering a chronic illness as a result of burnout, as I have, or maybe you're perhaps teetering on the edge of a burnout, then I hope what I share may be of use. The things I've learned this time around, or I'm in the process of learning really still, I didn't learn the first time. And they're hard lessons to learn. The first thing I really want to drive home is that healing is really often counterintuitive. So often when we get sick, or we feel stressed, or we feel sad, we reach for the quick fixes to try and make it go away as fast as possible. And this is a human instinct. We're wired to want pleasure, not pain. So we reach for the painkiller pills, or the junk food, or we play a video game late into the night, or we binge watch TV series as coping mechanisms, really. And the thing is that they can work. They can work really well for a period of time until they don't anymore. And then whether it's hours, days, weeks, even years later in some cases, it can leave you in a much worse spot. When I think back in my situation in the run-up to this most recent burnout, I can see that there was a period of higher emotional stress and pressures that I felt, but I was also adding fuel to the flames by doing things like binging sugary food, ice cream, cookies, on the weekends as a reward for completing the work week. Or I was going straight from working at a computer for many hours of a day into intense sprinting or intense weightlifting, and not enough more natural, gentle movement like walking, for example. I was also on screens late into the night, reading Reddit and reading true crime and things like that kept my nervous system in a stimulated state, a fight or flight state. Or playing video games in between work sessions, or multitasking, cooking and eating whilst listening to videos or podcasts on 1.5 or 2x speed. This was really my day-to-day existence. Filling up every minute of the day, it seems, in an effort to be productive, but it just makes you sick after a while. It's too much demand on the brain and the nervous system. And I can see that I was using these habits in an effort to escape the underlying emotional stress. It's really not intuitive to actually just sit with that stress. We do everything to avoid it and often make life harder for ourselves in the process of learning. But it's like trying to put plasters over a wound that's still bleeding heavily, it's just not going to work in the long run. So I don't know if you've had perhaps a similar experience as me in that sense. The next thing I'd like to perhaps touch on is about labels and diagnoses. This is maybe a bit more of a controversial topic to discuss. I know people have strong opinions about this, but as time has gone on, it's my opinion that a lot of these sort of diagnoses, while they may give you a label and that may give you a certain sense of security, like I'm not crazy, this isn't all in my head, there's very rarely like a concrete solution or treatment. It's like, just do this and you'll be better again. It's often very vague. If I were to go through a few, obviously burnout is an increasingly common issue around the world. I was reading a Forbes report on a study across 4 countries that found that over 40% of people felt exhausted always or often. Around 35% felt overwhelmed, and over 20% felt depressed. This wasn't a study done on multiple tens of thousands of people, so it wasn't a giant study, but it was big enough. It was over 1,000. And that's quite alarming in itself. Then you have other kinds of chronic illness labels, which, in my opinion, often evolve from similar things that can lead to burnout. Chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME, that's one that I've been labelled with. That affects over 1% of the US adult population, at least. Around 24 million people, I think, around the world. And that's just an estimate. Then you've got fibromyalgia, which is more pain-centered, you could say, but there's still a lot of similarities from that to chronic fatigue syndrome or burnout. That affects around 2% of the world's population. Also, no clear cure or treatment. And then you have, what should we say, long C. I'm not going to use the actual name, because I don't know if this video would get banned, but you know the virus of the recent years. I think that's affected something like 65 million around the world. It's come at an economic cost of over $1 trillion a year. And I know it's a hot topic whether it's a very similar syndrome as like chronic fatigue syndrome. It's just a different virus that maybe is kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, or the trigger into the cycle of the illness. And for me, I've had many different diagnoses, sort of tentative. They're like educated guesses, it's felt like, from the doctors I've seen. Chronic fatigue syndrome being one, long C being another, anxiety being another, and even chronic Lyme disease, which I firmly believed was the root cause of my issues the first time around, but now with hindsight I'm really starting to question that. Am I so unlucky to have all these diagnoses, or is there a root cause that keeps triggering these symptoms and these health issues? And I think there is. I think the secret lies in the autonomic nervous system, or ANS, which, if you don't know about it, don't worry, because I didn't before. But essentially it's the core wiring of our bodies, how our bodies operate, what connects our brains to the rest of our body, our spine, our gut, our key organs. And when it becomes overwhelmed by stressors, it can start to dysregulate and fall out of homeostasis. And that's when you can really start to experience physical health issues. It can cause your blood pressure to suddenly drop or spike, or your heart rate to race when you go from seated to standing, or it can mess up your hormones. It can mess up your sleep rhythms. It can mess up your libido. It can mess up your digestion. It can mess up your temperature regulation or your emotional regulation. It really affects all the core functioning in the body. And to me, I think that is really the root cause issue. But I think there are different factors for different people that can lead to this dysregulation. But broadly speaking, it's stress. But if you think, what is stress? The way I've kind of come to view it is there's a combination of sort of cognitive stressors or information inputs. There's emotional stressors, and there's physical stressors. And certainly for me, this most recent time around, there was a real combination of cognitive, emotional, and physical stressors going on. But the emotional stressors, in my opinion, are really what are the root cause of our suffering in many cases. I've come to learn that it's almost impossible to fully understand and process and release these emotional stresses, which are often in the unconscious mind. It's almost impossible to do that when the cognitive and physical stresses are so high, because your mind and your body never get that time and space to actually work through what's there underlying. It's being bombarded with too many continual stresses. In the physical stressor bucket, you've got things like over-exercising. Historically, our ancestors would not have gone, spending 8-10 hours a day sat at a desk looking at a screen, and then going to a gym and doing sprints on a treadmill, and then lifting really heavy weights and doing that every day. It would have been much more like casual walking around, gathering fruits and plants and things like that, and then maybe once a week there would be a big hunt with a big demand on your energy systems. It's a lot more intense. So in that way, we're living out of alignment with really how we're wired. That's one example. Another physical stressor would be not looking after your sleep. Another would be overeating or undereating, or eating unnatural foods or drinks. Alcohol, reliance on caffeine, energy drinks, that kind of thing. And then you've got the cognitive stresses, and I think this is often a really big bucket for people in the modern day, is things like video gaming. Addictions to that can be dating apps, swiping, the constant context changing of short form content, particularly on TikTok or short form videos on YouTube. There's also just general screen time use. I don't think screens are bad per se. Obviously I'm recording on a screen, but if you're spending 10-12 hours a day behind a screen, then I think it's not really going to be doing your health much good. Then there are other sort of sneaky stressors, and I've only again realised in hindsight how much I was doing this, but things like rushing chores, rushing your daily essentials like brushing your teeth or going to the toilet or using the shower or eating, often I would be multitasking. It's this kind of impatient, sort of restless, stressed energy. You're in fight or flight mode, essentially. You're in a survival state rather than in the good old rest and digest state, which is really what we're programmed to be in most of the time. And I think a lot of people nowadays are running on this fight or flight energy, and eventually, unless they make changes, it's going to hit this point of freeze, which I think this freeze state sums up a lot of these illnesses like burnout and chronic fatigue syndrome, for example. The body starts to reach this point of exhaustion. It's like I'm getting too many cues that I'm in danger, there's all this stress around, so our best bet is to kind of lie low and hide away until the stress is over, and then maybe once it's safe we can emerge once again. In my opinion, that's kind of what's going on at the root level. So, that's kind of what has been a part of the journey for me this time, is examining all these habits of stress that I had accumulated, and try to strip them away one by one, like a snake shedding its skin, and it's hard. It's hard because they're coping mechanisms, and the more you strip away, the more you have to kind of sit with yourself, to be with yourself, and that can be a scary place to be in a way. Certainly uncomfortable. And you start to see, wow, I can understand why I was running away, because maybe there's a lot of kind of fear or nervousness in your system that you'd been suppressing with these stressful habits. Or maybe there's actually rage or anger. Maybe there's a sense of loneliness or unworthiness or shame. That's a big one for a lot of people, including me. So what I can recommend is to try and give yourself some time and patience and grace in this process, because it's not easy. Most people, including me, have a lot of setbacks along the way. It's not linear. You make progress for a few days and then you lapse back into bad habits, or maybe you make good progress with one habit, and then you kind of overcompensate and end up doing more of another habit. This is all normal. Some people find the cold turkey approach, where you just cut everything, to be helpful, but I don't think the majority can actually sustain that. It's a very big ask on your brain and nervous system to do that all in one go. So, in my opinion, the more sustainable approach is to look for sort of 5% reduction in your net amount of external stressors every few weeks. And when I say external, I mean things like the overworking or the over-exercising, or spending loads of hours a day on a screen, or binge eating junk food, caffeine, video games, porn, all of these kind of things. It's just to chip away at them, kind of layer by layer. Don't try and fix it all at once. It's almost an impossible task, in my opinion. And don't be surprised, actually, if, particularly in these early stages, as you do start to reduce these habits of stress, that you begin to feel more overwhelmed, even more overstimulated, because you're now having to face those emotional stresses, which, in my opinion, as I say, are the core root stuff here. And it can feel overwhelming to really sit with rage, for example, or intense fear, or intense loneliness or shame. It can kind of feel like you're dying in a weird way. It can be really rough. So, as I say, patience and grace is the only way, really. And there's no shame in working with a therapist if you can afford it during this time, because it's a lot to work through on your own. We're social creatures ultimately, and we do need at least a degree of social support and validation to thrive and be at our best and feel safe. Ultimately, a lot of our wiring is programmed for safety. Are we under threat, or are we safe? So that's really my recommendations on this. I'll link a free spreadsheet below this video. Maybe you're starting to see my breath now. It's pretty cold here, although it's been a nice sunny day. I'll link a free spreadsheet that I have been using to kind of uncover the main cognitive and physical stressors that I was putting my body under, and adding more and more stimulation to an already stimulated and taxed nervous system. And in the sheet, you'll also be able to figure out which ones you might want to work on first. You could tackle the biggest one first, but actually I would suggest maybe trying a few that aren't so big, or the habits that you don't rely on so much, just to kind of gather a sense of confidence and hopefully momentum. You can start to make forward progress. I'll also include a link to a new newsletter that I'm starting. I plan to put out weekly newsletters, and it's going to be on this kind of topic. How to get out of this overstimulated, sort of overwhelmed state, so that we can essentially improve our health and well-being and not be stuck or at risk of relapsing into things like burnout or chronic fatigue, etc. So feel free to subscribe if it's of interest. The newsletters will always be coming out before the videos. But other than that, I hope some of this has made some sense, and I wish you good luck, and see you in a while.